My dearest listener, from the moment we met, I knew my life would never be the same. Would you do me the honor of making me the happiest researcher in wait, what was I saying? Ah, screw it. Never mind. It's an all new Prove It To Me. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prove It To Me. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Law. When I first started doing these study finds episodes, they were meant to be quick, one off filler episodes between the guest appearances. I mean, the guest appearances seem to be what folks really care about. No one actually wants to hear me rattle on endlessly about the things that I find interesting, right? I have to be honest though, I've become an addict. There's a real catharsis I feel that's associated with diving deeper behind the headlines. Every time I see the words study finds, I get butterflies in my stomach. It's Pavlovian. I start to anticipate the inevitable buzz I get from doing the search, clicking the links, and getting into the nitty gritty details to find out if this new study is really a game changer or if it's just a little bit of something somebody wrote up that got blown out of proportion. Or maybe it was slightly misconstrued when the morning news wrote up their summary of a summary. Either way, I find myself almost drooling at the chance to geek out over the details of this new research. And I promise, I have more guests on the way. The thing is, my guests so far have been researchers. Researchers spend a lot of time. No, that's actually it. Researchers spend a lot of time, period. It takes so much time and effort to answer a question thoroughly and definitively. There is no yes or no. There is no black or white. It's all gray, and there are many shades of gray. They spend months looking at the factors they want to study and figuring out all the possible confounding factors. They put so much effort into developing models and modifying models to measure relationships between variables. They pore over statistical analyses and try to explain the data and why the outcomes are the way they are. That's just the quantitative researchers. The qualitative researchers are even more screwed. They have to try to make sense of paragraph after paragraph of text from focus groups and interviews and loosely guided observations to try to pull themes that create a story for further quantitative analysis. Sometimes these studies take years. They want to get it right. That's how good research is done, with an aim to get it right, not with the intention to push an agenda. So it's no surprise that my guest researchers will reach out months in advance to schedule an appearance on the podcast. They want to make sure they have time to get it right. Honestly, I can't blame them. I would too. In fact, my own pet research projects are taking much longer than I expected because I want to make sure I get them right. So until then, you are stuck with me. But I promise we're only a few weeks away from the next guest appearance. Now, for this episode, I'm going back to sort of everyday health topics rather than a workplace safety topic. I mean, this is the stuff that ends up on the news, so that's what I tend to latch onto first. We've been able to do some workplace safety stuff over the last few episodes, so I think it's fair that we have some fun and get into an everyday health topic. And boy, this is a fun one. This is a topic that is just begging for some tongue-in-cheek, cynical, comedic takes. I don't know if you all are able to appreciate my sense of humor, but I really hope you enjoy going through this one with me. From MedPage Today, an article dated March 25th, 2025, entitled Surprising Findings from New Research About Dementia and Marriage, with the tagline, U.S. study could challenge the belief that marriage protects against cognitive decline. Whoa, buddy, we're getting saucy here, folks. Now, theoretically, Marriage is supposed to be a sacred institution, but you and I both know that this can be a divisive and emotional topic for many, many folks. So, MedPage Today had access to the entire study article because the article is open access. So, let's just read what their key takeaways were and we'll jump into the study. Key takeaways. Number one, unmarried people in a US study had lower risk of dementia than married people. Number two, the study followed 24,000 older adults through the National Alzheimer's Coordinating Center. And number three, findings were similar for men and women. I mean, really, folks, you ever run into that old married heterosexual couple and the wife is super naggy and opinionated and the husband is totally aloof? And it's not really clear if he's always been that way or if it's just an act? Or maybe he became this way just because it's easier and more peaceful than trying to fight it? Like, seriously, this is a classic trope in comedy movies and sitcoms. I won't be sexist here either because I've seen it the other way around too, where the wife is the one that's aloof and the husband is just a grumpy asshole. Honestly, you can ask my wife. She probably thinks I already have dementia. Seriously, since like year 5 of our marriage, the only words I hear my wife say are, "Were you listening to what I just said?" I don't do this intentionally or maliciously. I really suck at active listening. In fact, the only difference between my college professors and my wife is the fact that my wife holds an immediate oral exam after the lecture, and I don't have time to go back to the textbook or my study notes to make sure I had total comprehension. I may have a 4.0 GPA associated with my doctorate, but I'm sitting at a D average with the classes I get from my wife. Don't worry, everybody. I love my wife. As far as I know, she still loves me, even though she rolls her eyes at me when I space out. There's no trouble in paradise. But man, for those of you who may have trouble in paradise, it sounds like divorce might save you from dementia. Not to say I'm endorsing that, I'm just reading this study summary on MedPage Today. I mean, maybe there is something medically wrong with me already, and that's my excuse for spacing out during my conversations with my wife. All right, enough of that. Ready to get into the study and figure out what's going on? Let's do it. This study was published by Karakos and colleagues in March 2025 in Alzheimer's and Dementia, the Journal of the Alzheimer's Association. It is titled Marital Status and Risk of Dementia Over 18 Years Surprising Findings from the National Alzheimer's Coordinating Center. Okay, surprising findings is actually a little risque for a journal article title. I mean, I would do that for a presentation title just to get folks to come to my session at a conference. It's like these researchers wrote up the study like, oh, ho, ho, guess what we found? Like they're pretending to be these conniving gotcha artists instead of the droll geeks we all know they are. I'm putting myself in that category, by the way, not trying to be a dick. We researchers are, in fact, geeks and nerds, but we make the world a better place for it. Okay, first, funding disclosures and conflicts of interest. The authors declare no competing interests. In the supplemental information, the lead author declares the only funding provided was from a grant to their institution from the U.S. National Institutes of Health. So, no funny business there that we know of. Let's go through how the authors set up their problem statement. The authors start by referencing evidence that being married has traditionally been related to better health and longevity. They also discuss the marital resource model, which suggests that marriage provides social, psychological, and economic benefits unavailable through other relationships that, in turn, support healthier and longer lives. They also say there is conflicting evidence on marital status as it relates to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Some studies have said that unmarried, never married, divorced, and widowed folks are at higher risk, and others are inconclusive. There has also been contradiction in studies on whether this affects unmarried men more than unmarried women, with some reporting higher risk of poor health outcomes for men than women. They also note that married individuals are more likely to engage in preventative medical care than unmarried individuals, citing that individuals may be made aware that something is wrong because their partner told them. This is why, if I keep not listening to my wife, she's probably going to put me in a home. So, their justification for doing this study is that they are using data from the National Alzheimer's Coordinating Center, one of the largest cohorts, with annual clinical evaluation of dementia over one of the longest follow ups, which is up to 18 years. When you do a longitudinal study like this, a study that makes multiple observations over a period of time, it makes it easier to identify and measure all the other stuff that could be causing a certain outcome. Cross sectional studies, or those that only grab a snapshot at one period in time, don't show changes over time, obviously. Again, this is a way to get better correlations that get closer to causation. Additionally, this study is supposed to separate out different types of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, and frontotemporal lobar degeneration, as well as mild cognitive impairment. Lastly, the authors say they will look at potential moderating factors such as sex, age, race, education, depression, diagnostic form, participants' referral source, primary reason for visiting the research centers, and genetic vulnerability. Yeah, so this is set up to be a pretty comprehensive study. Let's check out the methods to see how they did it. Sample methods. They started with a little over 50,000 participants. They excluded almost 10,000 who withdrew from the study after the baseline observation, about 600 who were younger than 50 years old, almost 17,000 who had already had dementia at baseline, and 300 who responded other/unknown to marital status at baseline. I have so many questions. How do you not know your marital status? You know what? Maybe I shouldn't ask. Anyway, final sample size was 24,107, 59.6% female, and average age 71.79 years at baseline. There's some other stuff in here about how they combined groups of marital status. There was a small group of folks who said they were separated, and they were combined with the larger group of folks who said they were divorced. Similarly, there was a small group who said they were living as married or had a domestic partner. Those folks were combined with the married group. Now, the reason you do this for statistical analysis is because when you have a widely varied size groups, it can throw off the outputs of the results. Remember, the bigger the sample size, the more accurate the correlation will be. If you compare a tiny group to a large group, it doesn't give you a realistic comparison in the results. I actually had to do this during my dissertation as well. Now, again, I try not to get too deep into statistics on this podcast, but I want to point out a different type of analysis that was used here. They used Cox proportional hazards regression. So we're looking at regression models, but it's a different type than we've looked at in the past, like linear regression or logistic regression. Now, I have never used Cox regression myself, but basically, this type of regression is used when you are looking at the association between a predictor variable or independent variable and survival time as your dependent variable. In this case, that quote unquote survival time is the time it takes for the onset of dementia. So, in the output of the Cox model, you get this number called a hazard ratio, which compares the hazard or risk of an event between two groups. The hazard ratio greater than 1 indicates an increased risk, while a hazard ratio less than 1 indicates a reduced risk. You also get a confidence interval, which shows a range that hazard ratio falls in at certain percentage of confidence. Basically, the closer those numbers are together, the more sure we are that hazard ratio is correct. Hey, did you fall asleep? Come on, stick with me. I promise, no more statistics. Just know that this is an appropriate statistical test for this study. So they compared the risk of dementia for unmarried groups, meaning the widowed, divorced, or never married, compared to the married group as their reference group. They ran two different models. The first included age and sex as covariates. The second added race, ethnicity, education, living alone, physical health, depression, smoking behavior, diagnostic form, referral source, primary reason to visit the research center, and genetic vulnerability. The second model that includes all this other stuff is called their fully adjusted model. Again, all of this is done to try to paint a more complete picture of the correlations. Now, at this point, I've hopefully given you enough about the statistical modeling that if you want to go through all of the individual calculations in the results section, you are more than welcome to. And you can feel a little bit more confident about what you're looking at. At this point, I'll put everyone to sleep for sure if I go through each one of these individually. So, I'm going to jump down to the discussion and get the most important parts of these results. Accounting for age and sex, that was the first model, the authors found that widowed, divorced, and never married individuals had about 50% or lower dementia risk relative to their married counterparts. That held true in the second model when they included all of these other factors as covariates. That held true in the second model when they included all of those other factors as covariates. All unmarried groups were also at lower risk of Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body dementia, with a pattern of mixed findings for frontotemporal lobar degeneration. There were no associations found with risk of vascular dementia or mild cognitive impairment. Now, on that mild cognitive impairment piece, they did a follow up analysis because some individuals already had mild cognitive impairment at baseline. When they excluded those folks, unmarried groups were at lower risk for all causes of dementia. When they included those folks, the unmarried groups were at lower risk of that mild cognitive impairment progressing into dementia. Okay, is everybody still with me? What we have so far is a pretty good longitudinal study with a large sample size that says unmarried folks are at lower risk of dementia than married folks, even when accounting for all of these other potential factors like age and sex. The authors state this is contrary to most previous longitudinal studies, so we're at a bit of a crossroads. Now we get to the fun part of the discussion where the authors start to speculate why this might be the case. I'm going to pull out the best ones. They start looking at other studies that examine health relative to marital status. There is some evidence in previous studies of cognitive improvement, happiness, and life satisfaction after divorce, and social participation after a partner dies. That's a little dark, but okay. Also, never married individuals are more likely to socialize with friends and neighbors and engage in healthier behaviors, while married individuals are less likely to engage in high quality socialization in their networks. Also, there is some evidence to suggest that the health benefits associated with marriage are only evident in high quality marriages. This is a point to examine for future research, they say, since this study did not look at marriage quality, only marital status. There's also a potential in this sample of what they call ascertainment bias. Remember, this data came from the National Alzheimer's Coordinating Center, and earlier we talked about married individuals being more likely to have partners who notice and report cognitive issues. So, there could be a little bit of bias here where the unmarried folks have underreported diagnoses of cognitive issues. So, what are the limitations to this study? The first thing is where this data came from. These participants are referral based or voluntary. They do not fully represent the US population. And because of the nature of what this research center is, they have worse subjective cognition overall. The authors state that Black individuals and unmarried individuals may be underrepresented relative to the entire US population. There's also room to look at nuances, such as the role of relationship factors like marital quality and relationship duration. The authors conclude by restating the overall findings. Unmarried folks are at lower risk of dementia, but qualify that by also restating the potential for delayed diagnoses because they don't have partners who would be more likely to notice they possibly have dementia. So there it is. Those are the parts that the news reports miss. Those limitations and potential biases. What did we learn? Well, if you are in the unmarried group, you might be at lower risk of dementia. Also, if you don't have someone living with you to notice your potential onset of dementia, you're probably less likely to get diagnosed anyway. If you are married, you apparently have two options. You can either try to actively listen to your partner and have a healthy relationship where your partner will make sure you get the care you need when you need it, Or you can ignore your partner and risk them sending you to get a brain scan out of spite. Either way, you'll know for sure if you have dementia or not, I guess. That's all I got. Until next time, I'm Dr. Matt Law. This has been another episode of Study Finds on the Prove It To Me podcast. Take care and stay safe, everyone. Prove It To Me is produced by me, Matt Law. Original music by Wes London. You can find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Like what you've heard so far? Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Got questions about what we talked about or research that you want to share? Send an email to contact@proveitpod.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the official position, opinion, or strategies of their employers or companies. Examples of research and data analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based on very limited, often single use case, and sometimes dated information. Assumptions made within this discussion about research and data analyses are not necessarily representative of the position of the host, the guests, or their employers or companies. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast. The presentation of the content by the guests does not necessarily constitute an active endorsement of the content by the host.